welcome everybody to this meeting of the Resources Committee, which is being held as usual by MS Teams. If by any chance I'm disconnected and drop off the call, Caroline Stewart will step in and chair the meeting until I'm reconnected. I'd like to welcome, I think it's Alan Wright from HMICS and any others who are joining us on Teams or observing from wherever. Welcome very much to this meeting. We've got a number of things to go through, and we're aiming to finish certainly by lunchtime. I think we have apologies from a new member of the committee, but not a new member of the board, Tom Halpin, who's unfortunately already committed elsewhere today. And I think we've also got apologies from DCO Page. I would just like to mention also that when we come to one item on the agenda, item 6.1, the internal audit contract, Mary Pickathley, the chair of ARAC, will be joining us for that item. Are there any declarations of interest or connections? Okay, thank you. And could I seek your approval to taking business in private for items 5 to 10?
Yes.
Thank you. So, turning to the minutes and actions from previous meetings, we've actually got 2 meetings to consider, one of which we've actually dealt with only in the private session. So at this stage, the minute of the public part of the meeting on 9th of August 2022, could everybody confirm that this is an accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. Following on from that, we've got an action log, 2 items, both proposed for closure for the explanation given alongside them. These items, are you all happy that we close these items? Okay, thank you. Moving on now to item 2.3, decisions taken since the last meeting. Now, under section 11 of our standing orders, we're permitted to consider by correspondence any items which are urgent and where it's not practical to hold a meeting. There was a need to consider a recent contract for forensics toxicology casework analysis, and we held this offline and recommended to the board for approval at its meeting on the 25th of August. So that's just for the formal record. Turning now to section 3, the financial monitoring report for quarter 2. Welcome James and Lynn. Mysteriously just appear absolutely on the screen on time. That's absolutely great, thank you. James, do you want to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is the quarter 2 monitoring report and sets out the forecast for the full financial year. We are expecting that we will deliver the revenue and capital budgets, and there's still a bit more work on reform, but Lynn will speak to that. The only thing I would say before handing over to Lynn is that we don't normally do budget adjustments in year because, you know, that I don't particularly like them, in which sometimes you can do it in order to make an actual look like it's in line with the budget. But we have proposed here to members around approval for 3 revisions, and they are exceptional in the sense that the first one is quite a big change to the pay budget as a consequence of the 5% pay award that has now been awarded to both officers and staff, which is significantly higher than what had been budgeted and funded initially when the budget was set in April for public sector pay policy. And then a couple of adjustments relating to a new accounting standard that, a standard that's been adopted for the first time within policing, IFRS 16, which has required some adjustments between capital and revenue. So that's why we're asking for it. It isn't going to become normal practice. It is a kind of exceptional items. But with that, I'll hand over to Lynn, if you're okay with that, Chair. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, James. And certainly, I think the significance of the pay award is absolutely right to change that. And the 2 other adjustments are really of a sort of technical accounting nature, which are just to follow in line with changes in accounting, government accounting practice. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you very much. So just in terms of revenue, the Q2 position remains break even, in line with budget, so essentially in line with the funding. And the deliverability of the forecast has changed back to amber. It was moving towards red. Last month, but just following the work on the Q2 forecast, that's reverted back to amber there. So just in terms of the numbers, the net expenditure forecast against budget is 1.9 million under, but that's mainly due to the over recovery of airport income of 2.8 million, and it's offset with other funded pressures. So that's compensated with a movement in our GIA. So like I said, it remains, all our expenditure remains in line with funding, albeit there's some movement on the budget there. So just in terms of the Q2 forecast, the report shows that there's it's quite a busy picture. There's 28.9 million of cost pressures which are funded by equivalent underspends in the forecast, and these are detailed in page 3 of the appendix. So the main variances there are 15.3 million additional overtime plus the associated on costs. And as we've been reporting, we are incurring additional overtime this year because we are running below the officer establishment of 17,234, which is obviously the budgeting operational planning assumption for the 22-23 budget. So although there is a significant overtime overspend, it is offset by underspend in base salary costs because we are under establishment, as I said. In terms of other pressures, we've got legal and liability claims, and there's significant inflationary pressures which we've been reporting again throughout the previous months, so there's nothing surprising there. And in terms of that underspend in the officer base cost, that's 25.3 million plus there's an additional 3.6 on the NI reversal. So overall 28.9 million of pressures offset by 28.9 million underspends. So James mentioned the proposed budget adjustments. There's also a graph on page 3, and that just shows the impact of those adjustments in terms of moving from the approved 22-23 budget to the revised 22-23 budget, and they are detailed in Appendix B as well for greater information around that. The report is also showing the current, well, at the time of writing the report, the costs associated with Operation Unicorn was 13.4 million, so that's the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. That has been excluded from our base core numbers in terms of our forecast, but it is there for information on the assumption that it will be fully funded. So that was we were still working on the number. That has increased. We'd still to include some resourcing costs in there, but it's just purely there for information purposes at the moment. But like I say, the assumption is that it would be fully funded. So just in terms of capital, the Q2 forecast is 61.4 million. That's 3.6 million over the revised budget, and that's mainly due to additional fleet purchases, which is funded by a transfer between reform and capital. So when we go on to the reform, we'll see that that's 2.8 million under, but essentially there's been a switch there to compensate that. So the only other thing around capital that I'll point out, but James or Michael may want to add, is that we're still working to identify slippage to meet the overall forecast, but that's been progressing as we move through the year. So probably not much else to say on that. So I'll maybe stop there and just open it up to comment or question.
Right, thank you very much, Lynn. I'll pass over to others in a moment, but just to confirm the Operation Unicorn, any idea how long it's going to be before we'll hear how that's been finalised?
So we're working closely with colleagues in operational policing, particularly in the RDUs, to finalise the cost. I couldn't say definitively, you will never know for certain, but I suppose from a material perspective about making sure all the overtime claims, all the allowances and expense claims are in, I would expect by the end of this month through the November payroll that we will substantially be there, and we'll take a view on it at that point. But I think it's probably safe to say, even at the moment, like since the figure that Lynn's just given you is now increased by about £2 million, I think we're probably, 98, 99% there already, and we'll hopefully get that finalised at the end of this month. So hopefully by the end of this calendar year, we will have a clear position on that.
Right. Thanks, James. I presume that in practical terms, we're dealing with this rather the same way as we dealt with COP26, just ring fencing it and dealing with it separately.
We are ring fencing it and dealing with it separately and seeking full recovery of the kind of the costs that were incurred as a consequence of the same approach in that respect. The only thing that is slightly different from our perspective, and why I'm saying, I couldn't tell you exactly when everything will come through, is that obviously COP26, we were able to have a level of certainty around planning because we knew when it was going to happen. We knew exactly who we were expecting to be rostered on each day and where officers would be deployed, whereas the Unicorn, whilst there obviously was a clear plan in place, there was a reactive element around resources that happened to be available at that time, and even down to the day of the week when it happened, obviously had an impact. So we weren't able to schedule in advance so that we're actually ticking off claims coming in against the pre-arranged schedule. Yeah. That's the slight difference in this, but with in all other respects, it's a similar approach to COP26, and that did stand us in very good stead, I think, for the way in which, certainly from a financial perspective, that we've been capturing the costs of Unicorn.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Alistair, you've got your hand up. Alistair?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. If you can hear noise in the background, apologies. We've got workmen in the house at the moment. Thanks very much to both James and Lindy. And as always, this is a relatively simple report to read, but I think that disguises the complexity of managing Police Scotland's budget and all the variables that are currently in play, over and above the variables that are always in play when you're managing something of this complexity. So, a relatively simple read, very well explained. I've got two questions. One's in relation to the revenue resource budget, and the other one's in relation to the capital budget. So, in terms of the revenue budget, you've got this balancing act between under establishment at this moment in time and the use of overtime. And this may be a question that's more appropriate in People Committee. But I'm just slightly concerned about the amount of overtime that is being done by police officers at this moment. How sustainable is that going forward? For them as individuals, given that Police Scotland does strive to be an employer of choice. There's a work-life balance. They're working in often, extremely pressurised roles. So that financial balance is one part of it, but you've also got, looking after our workforce. And I don't know what thoughts and considerations and how the budget, plays into that type of thinking. And then I've just asked my second question now. You're obviously looking for slippage, etc., within the capital budget, and we know what your long-term capital strategy is, and we approve that and applaud it. But you've got, for your contractors on major capital projects, they're experiencing all the inflationary pressures that everybody else is, and we know there's a complexity in managing these types of contracts to bring them in on time, on budget, to the quality, and that ongoing relationships. So I wondered if you'd seen a difference this year with inflation in year as high as it is, and how does that feed back into Police Scotland for your teams and the wider teams as their workloads are increasing? Because as I said right at the start, a relatively simple read, but that does mask, what a fantastic job is going on and the complexity of managing it. So that's my two questions.
Thanks, Alistair. James, do you want to take these?
I will, yeah. Thanks for the question. I'll maybe start with the second one on capital. We are seeing a real pressure coming through on price at the moment, and particularly around some of the estates work. I was speaking to Phil Collard, the head of estates, earlier this week about that, and two issues. The first one is that prices are absolutely higher, and therefore our buying power is not going as far. An example being in some of the housing works that we've been doing to try and bring the police houses up to an appropriate standard in the Northwest Highlands and in Shetland, and particularly in Shetland, where we've not even been able to, through an initial procurement, to have success. So we think we've got a solution to that, but the prices that are coming through are significantly higher than we had anticipated, and therefore our ability to do more works has diminished within that budget. Now, we're not yet seeing that in other areas like fleet, where we have got fixed prices at the moment, but as I understand it from speaking with the head of fleet earlier this week as well, that that there are negotiations underway with the suppliers on that contract about what the increases might be into next year. So whilst the immediate issue has been the construction costs, we are starting to see other costs, capital costs coming through, which is eroding our buying power when in respect of capital, when we are facing flat cash capital allocations over the next number of years, and that could in real terms, I suppose, reduce by 15-20% over the next 2 to 3 years. The other aspect of it is as well that on procurement exercises that are going out for works around whether it's replacing a roof or fabric type work on buildings, because of inflation, suppliers are quite often only holding prices for 30 days, and given our governance arrangements and what we have to do in order to get approvals, I mean that there is a real risk that we may end up having to go back out and re-procure. And I don't think that's yet happened, but I think we have come close to it, and it's something I think we might need to be mindful of around potentially needing accelerated governance over the coming year or two, if we want to take advantage of a price that we've been quoted and not be in a situation where we don't get that signed off within 30 days and we have to go back out and re-procure and end up with a higher price. So yeah, a load of challenges around capital at the moment, and likely to continue for the next couple of years. On the question around overtime, we are obviously conscious of the fact that there has been considerable overtime, and also during the period of Operation Unicorn, also a big increase in re-rostered rest days and double up, which again is eating into the free time, if you like, or the rest time of police officers, and those balances have gone up. But the trend on re-rostered rest days is that is decreasing, so that is a positive. But on overtime, that clearly that it's not a sustainable model to continue using that element of overtime to compensate for being under the current establishment. So that is absolutely being factored into the discussions that we're currently having with regards to funding and your funding allocations for 23-24, and how we might set a budget into the next year, just to give you that assurance. And if you were looking for any kind of more detailed information on that, then I could go and speak to P&D colleagues to provide any further information, and maybe through People Committee something could be brought forward in that regard. But certainly, from a planning assumption or a planning perspective, we are not working on the basis that the current arrangements will continue into the next financial year.
Thanks very much, Chair. Do you mind if I just ask a quick follow-up?
Please do.
Starting with the question on overtime, I really appreciate that, and there is that clear linkage, to the People Committee and the work that's going on in P&D, and I think it would be, I think everyone within Police Scotland and within the board of the SPA are focused on those, welfare and sustainability issues. So it's good to hear it. So to get some further detail on the possibilities and the practicalities, I think that would be useful, James. I appreciate that offer. And where it emerges into which committee, I'm not quite sure, but we can have that conversation. So I'd like to pick up on that offer. So thank you. And the capital one, I absolutely get that bit about accelerated governance and improving the agility of the organisation, acting quicker. you know, the caution is there is we have to maintain collectively very robust governance around these things, because we're talking about substantial, you know, amounts of public money here. So it's just a caution there. And my other wee thought as well on that was that, you know, you want to develop sustainable relationships with your suppliers and your partners, you know, and you know, they're feeling real pressures, and you know, they may have given you a price, they may be contracted to do things, and I'm sure they'll endeavour really hard to do that. But you know, there's always the possibility that, you know, they cannot, and you see, you know, routinely, and I know due diligence is done during procurement processes and all that, but these are unprecedented times. So does that type of thinking and that, you know, get exercised and considered as you are, you know, trying to get that flexibility to meet the long-term capital strategy? Just wanted to, you know, hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so on the first point around governance, absolutely agree. It's yeah, we wouldn't be looking to cut corners or reduce quality. It would just be around trying to look at timescales. But yeah, no, totally agree with that. The point around the commercials, the procurement team do engage regularly with our big suppliers, and you know, we do from time to time get suppliers coming forward and asking around, you know, could we get uplifts that are outside what's within the contract. Now that is looked at on a case by case basis, and you know, during the pandemic, for example, there were assumptions around certain volumes of activity, and you know, things were done around the edges to provide, you know, something that, you know, was making sure that there was the opportunity for suppliers to make money out of contracts, but at the same time protecting the public purse. So it is a really fine line around, you know, we need to make sure that we're protecting, you know, the public purse around not paying out, you know, excess sums to suppliers, but at the same time, we don't want suppliers getting into financial difficulty, which then potentially presents us with another problem and another cost. So we do weigh that up very carefully, and there are commercial conversations that take place on a regular basis between procurement, but only the procurement team with finance and suppliers. We don't, obviously the business areas don't get involved in that type of discussion.
No, really appreciate it. And you know, these are extremely challenging times, and as I said at the outset, you know, the way this has been presented and how you're explaining the management of it, you know, I'm very appreciative of it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Could I just add my congratulations too for the way you presented the information. It's always extremely clear, and I don't in any way underestimate the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to get there. Just on the subject of procurement and contracts, I was delighted to hear that the procurement team have got an award from SIPFA for all their excellent work. So I think that just reinforces the fact that we are benefiting hugely from an excellent procurement team who are doing their very best in some really tricky circumstances. Caroline, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, I would just completely agree with that. We're very lucky. We've got a great team, and so I just want to pass on my congratulations as well. Great job. And I don't know, James Lynn, I might be reading this wrong, but I'm looking at the non-pay costs, and I'm kind of extrapolating for the sort of full year. And I'm looking, and I'm assuming that in the budget, the 10% inflation is kind of in there. But then I'm sort of looking that we're going to be 5.8% down on the year. And it's just when I was reflecting about that, I'm thinking, you know, one of the challenges going forward, especially when you come into difficult times, is keeping that non-pay bill kind of at the same kind of proportion, I suppose, to the other costs as we've always had, because the way that we're going to kind of get through these troubled times is to carry on investing in things like technology, the estate to transform that, etc., etc. So I was just wondering, are we, I suppose, looking for the savings disproportionately in non-pay as opposed to elsewhere? Is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and you know, really topical at the moment. I mean, it's an absolute commitment from the police service to maintain that relative balance. And the Chief Constable has said, you know, we want to make sure that we whatever level of resource that we have with regards to officers and staff, that they are sufficiently resourced to do the job properly, and has been really clear on there's no point having a workforce that doesn't have the right safety
Tools.
equipment and
Yep.
tools to do the job. So, you know, that's a really strong position that we're putting into Scottish Government around funding for next year, that what we don't want to do is decimate our non-pay, you know, which is our buildings, our cars, our kit, our technology, in order to hold on to a particular number around workforce. It needs to be done in the round, and it needs to be a balanced position so that we've got a properly supported workforce into the future.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the wicked problems going forward, but I think it's one that we have to face into, really, because, you know, we can't afford to take the foot off the pedal in terms of that investment going forward.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Katrina, any questions from you? Right, I think that would take us on to reform then, Lynn.
Yeah, so yeah, just in terms of reform, I'd mentioned earlier, speaking about capital, the current forecast is 22.2 million, which is the 2.8 million under budget, but that is because there is a switch, you know, a switch between reform and capital. So there's nothing, it's progressing as planned in terms of overall delivery. The main thing around reform is, and the reason that it's a higher risk than the rest, is because of the approvals process with Scottish Government, which we've spoke about before, in terms of like, you know, Scottish Government are reviewing the reform budget, etc. So that has been shown as a higher risk in terms of the deliverability of the budget, but that's mainly around potential delays, etc., from the accountable officer process that's been implemented.
Yes, I mean, I think there's no doubt that as we're now, 4.5 months to go to the year end, there is a point at which, even if we get an approval from SG, we would be in a situation where we couldn't actually implement it, which would be very embarrassing.
Yeah, we are getting close to that point. There's certainly a number of contracts that your leadership matters in particular has been with government, I think since August, so that there isn't a great deal of time now. But if that contract was signed and released, then, you know, we would still be able to make good progress on that over the course of this financial year. I think there's a kind of 12-week period for planning for that, and that's where a big bulk of the cost comes in. But the window is narrowing, so we do really need to try and get clarity and a final position on what the reform allocation for policing will be for this year, because it would be embarrassing if, you know, contracts are not signed and we can't then progress and we underspend, but, you know, and it ends up being a pure underspend. We need to get a agreed position with government on this, so everybody has clarity, and, you know, we can make sure that we spend to budget. So at the moment, that is why, you know, we are saying that there's a real risk around this, and reform is sitting at red around deliverability, because it's not just a case of what we would normally have, which is there's an allocation and we go and spend against it. We've got money that we want to spend, but it's being held up by government. But at the same time, the very same people that are holding up haven't yet made a decision on what they're doing around letting us spend the money. So we do need to try and get a position on that as soon as possible, and certainly been having a bit of dialogue on that this week, and we really would like to try and get that closed out this week if possible.
And I think you should certainly be, I'm sure you're doing this anyway, just reinforcing the fact that the time window is getting into a difficult territory. And all that's going to happen is, if they don't approve things this year and it rolls into next year, it will put additional pressure on next year. The work under reform will not go away.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Particularly in the case of your leadership matters, you know, the training that we need to do for our leaders is absolutely, you know, core and a top priority for the service. So, you know, it needs to be done, and it would be, you know, disappointing if this contract isn't signed. We end up having to go out and re-procure, and it becomes a pressure next year, and we've lost another 12 months of not being able to provide our leaders with the training that, you know, is recognised, that is required. Yes. And, you know, the consequences of not doing it, as is, you know, being commented upon in other parts of the UK in policing, is not a place where we want to be. So yeah, it's not signing a contract and not allocating the funding this year doesn't make it go away. It, like you say, it just makes a bigger problem build up for next year.
Yeah, thank you. Alistair, you want to come back in on this?
Yeah, it's just, you know, really important point, and I'm slightly struggling to understand it, because I'm sure you're articulating extremely well, you know, the possibilities of this not getting approved, and I know the sponsor team worked really hard and understand all these types of deadlines. So what's sitting behind the delay? Because it's not usual. Is it because of the complexity of overall budgets within government at the moment, or is there some other explanation for it?
I think police divisions certainly have been making the case, but I think it probably is linked to the kind of financial challenges within the Scottish Government budget, and you know, from a purist technical perspective, you might call this discretionary spend, in that, you know, it's not contractually committed. So in that sense, it's maybe discretionary, but you know, the service, and you know, I would argue that providing police officers, given the nature of the role and responsibility in society, the right level of leadership training is actually, you know, critical, and is not discretionary. But from a purist, you know, it's not contractually committed yet, therefore it hasn't been signed to make a financial commitment. I think that's what lies behind it, but as I say, we'll look to try and get a resolution to that over the coming days.
No, thanks for that, James, and thanks, Chair, for allowing me to come in on that.
So it's a very important area, and it's important that we understand what is actually having an impact and delaying things in an unusual way. I think that takes us to the end of this particular report, and I would like to thank both Lynn and James for the clarity of the papers and the response to questions this morning. Following up from Alistair's request for more information on overtime, and James, your agreement to provide something suitable, I think both People Committee, on the sort of just the way in which overtime is being handled, and the impact on the morale and capability of officers, because they can't, as has already been mentioned, there's a limit to how much overtime you can possibly do in any one office for any one officer. To get some better analysis of this, we will be interested here in the financial implications, but I think the People Committee will have some wider issues. And I think in overall terms, it would be helpful to understand a little bit more about, is overtime being worked right across the country, or are there pockets of it? How much of it is really dealing with business as usual, and how much of it is responding to one-off events? Obviously, Operation Unicorn was a one-off, but there are loads of other things in there that may affect different parts of the country in a different way. So trying to get a better understanding of how that all comes together, and then hence the journey forward, I think would be extremely helpful, both to people and to us.
Yeah, no, we're happy to pick that up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So members are asked to note the year-to-date position and the forecast position within the report, and to approve the budget revisions detailed in Appendix B, which James explained so clearly at the outset. Are we happy to do that? Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on to item 4, the Transformation Programme Benefits Report, where I think we're welcoming both Andrew and Kerry, and I can see Kerry on the screen. Oh yes, and Andrew's now bobbed up the screen. Welcome to you both. Good morning.
Members.
I think you can take it, Andrew, that the papers have been studied in some detail by members. So would you just like to highlight anything that you think we should be focusing on in particular?
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, members. Yeah, so just to mention, members, that this is the new format now arriving at resources that we'd introduced you to a number of weeks ago. So, you know, again, it's kind of drawn out the broader benefits case beyond just financial and efficiency. So, if it's okay with yourself, Chair, I'll hand to Kerry just to pull out some of the highlights.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Kerry, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So as Andrew said, this is the first time we've brought forward the new format. So happy to take comments on that, and we can, we'll look to mature that as we go through. But hopefully it's going to be a bit clearer for the members to see exactly what we're trying to pull out. So I'll take the papers as read, but I will go through a couple of things that are probably may prompt some conversation. So just to give a bit of clarity. So you'll see in the overarching paper at 2.2, it details the movement since we were here in April time. So that's where things have gone either up or down. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you through some of those in a bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So I'm going to just go to the appendix, if that's okay, Chair, because I think that that's key. That's the stuff that we're now proposing. This is the type of format that we're working up. So there's a slide obviously at the beginning, which is the executive summary. And what we've tried to do there for the members is pull out any key things that have happened since our last report. So that'll cover where we are on our cashable benefits, where there have been some outcomes, etc., and where there have been change requests. Now, obviously, with the new scheme of delegation, which came in since this paper was produced, some of the change requests will actually come to this committee anyway in a bit more detail. But what we've tried to do is pull out some of that, and I might focus on a couple of those just for a second. So in here, there's a couple of bullet points. So bullet point 3 covers some of the officer and staff efficiencies, which you'll see there's been some small increases since April. And then there's been a decrease. There was a change request brought forward to Change Board for CAM for a number of FTE. So I just thought I would give just a bit more context around that, given that CAM was such a iconic programme, and I know some of us will have been around since it first started. So I thought, because it is quite a large number, so I just wanted to give a bit of context around that. So when CAM first came to being, obviously there was a significant number of FTE benefits, just under 600, that we were looking, efficiencies that we were looking to repurpose. Now, we managed to validate just under 109, I think it was 184 of those, and then COVID hit. So the challenge we've had since then is our baselines. So as you'll be well aware, when the business case came forward, we agreed a methodology, we agreed a baseline, we agreed how we would measure that through the DPU, etc., etc. That was all fine. That's how we validated the 184. However, COVID then hit, which totally messed up the baselines, because the way we do business is slightly different now. So how we deal with the public, the knock-on effect of that, and how we deal with the crime-related activities during the pandemic has impacted, actually, it's like measuring apples and pears now. So we waited a while thinking post-COVID it might settle back in, but actually, as we all know, this is now our new norm. We're never going to go back to how we managed business before COVID. Now, that doesn't mean the benefits are not there. So we all know that, we had the resolution teams in C3, the ability to support the COVID responses was all part of how we put in Thrive, and how we prioritise police attendance, etc. None of that would have been possible without CAM. So I suppose I'll go through these, and then I'll take some questions, but I just wanted to pull that one out because I know that we've talked about CAM for a long time, but I think just to give some level of confidence, hopefully, is that it wouldn't be a true figure if we were trying to validate it now. So the decision was taken at Change Board was that either we could keep it on our forecast, we're probably going to look at it at some point, but every month we've been looking at it, and actually it's just we're unable to validate it due to the reasons I've just stated. So that's one of the key things. And then in point 5, there was a couple of other change requests that I'll just touch on briefly. So there's one around AMPR. So it does say it's reduced its cashable value. What I would say is AMPR in its original business case didn't have any cashable benefits. So it was never planned benefits. These were emerging benefits that were identified through some legacy contracts that we were going to no longer require. So they did actually achieve just over £660,000 of benefits. However, we don't think there'll be any further benefits. So although it says it is reduced, so it's more of a, we want to just make sure we're not keeping it in our forecast, but it was never a planned income generation. So, but again, from a governance perspective, we need to put through a change request. And the other key one in there is NEDIP. So yes, NEDIP did drop some of their planned value by 200k. To put that into perspective, it's less than 2% of the benefits that NEDIP have produced. So again, this is when we got to the end project review for NEDIP, we evaluated all the benefits, and actually the number came out slightly lower than expected. But as I say, just for a bit of context, that is, you know, NEDIP still have £6.4 million worth of benefits. So it's in context, it's a slightly smaller number. So they were the key things I was going to pull out from the exec summary. I'm happy to stop there, Chair, before I get into the further slides, if you'd like, or carry on, just whatever the members would prefer.
Thanks, Kerry. I think if you pause there and we'll see what questions have arisen from what you've said to date. Caroline.
Hi, Kerry, and thanks, Chair, and thanks for your report. I quite like the new format, actually. It's sort of getting better, and I think it's quite easy now to follow. So I think well done. I am going to pick you up on CAM, as you would probably expect, because I was on the CAM oversight group. So I sort of appreciate that having gone from, you know, getting it mobilised, the pandemic hit and things changed, and we went into an accelerated kind of rollout of the project. But that project was very successful, and I think from my perspective, the sort of fundamentals on which the business case were made, which was around, you know, being able to make diary appointments as opposed to treating everything the same urgency, that prioritisation piece, etc., will drive savings. And I'm just wondering about how we have come to the point where we're taking that down by 50%, because for me, I don't appreciate where that difference in working model has come, because we're still getting a call and it's responded to. And the way that we were changing with CAB was the way that Thrive assessment was done, and then the way that things were prioritised. So I guess my question and my challenge back is to say, is that actually correct? And it's back to the point that we were having when we had our session with Tully Allen, and you'll probably remember this, we were saying, you know, these business cases, when they come and they have a kind of thing that they get approved, that whole change piece around it is the difficult piece at the end, where the benefits have to be realised, and especially now that we've got less pounds to invest in things, it's really important that we're driving these benefits through. So I'm just wondering what's happened to that, because if we're going to say that the answer is increased demand, which I suspect would probably be the answer, because it's the only one I can think of, then that has to be a separate kind of piece to, rather that the business case is just kind of gone under by 50% of what we planned it to, if that makes sense to you. So I just wonder what your thoughts were on that. Thanks.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yes, I would expected you to ask the question, Caroline. So I think it's not about that we're saying we've not achieved the benefits. The issue we have is validating the benefits for. So what we always, as we do in all our bits, our benefits framework is around. So we get, as I said, we agreed a methodology. We agree how we're going to measure it. That CAM has been measured through the DPU. And we agreed what the baseline was. So we always have to go back to our baseline and then go back to our working model. The difference is our working model is completely different from what we had in the business case. So that's where the challenge is. So it's not about, you know, we've not seen some of the investment in these roles, so into resolution teams, and there's been various ones that have been talked about throughout other updates. But so it's not about saying we've not done it, but I suppose from a governance perspective and being very clear, if we were then to be audited again on, right, well, give us the validation, which is what we're asked to do to provide to either ASETs or HMI. I couldn't do that for this part of the CAM piece because our baselines are so different from what they were post and pre-COVID. That's the challenge we've got. So it's not, I mean, the increased demand piece, that's not a reason for doing this. That is not linked to the actual reduction of these numbers. This is purely saying I am unable internally to give you clear validation of those. However, we are confident that the CAM has delivered what it said it would deliver, but I am unable to do that from a sort of purist perspective, I suppose.
Okay, I sort of get what you're saying. And I think this comes back to having that kind of visibility of that sort of DPU kind of information that's basing these kind of forecasts and things on. Because at the moment, we just kind of have to sort of work a bit blind on that. And it's going to be very hard when we're assessing cases going forward, when there is going to be, when you talk about priorities, what are the priorities? And they're going to be the ones that return money back. And that's going to have to be driven through quite hard. And I think, that's kind of, in this case, quite disappointing to see that where we thought this would drive quite an enormous efficiency, it's kind of ended up being half that. So I think it's a kind of lesson for going forward in terms of we must make sure that baselining's right. And I appreciate COVID came from nowhere, so I'm kind of saying,
Yeah, because what I would say on that, our baseline, and I'm confident at the time, was accurate. That's how we were able to validate the first part of CAM. So the 184 we were able to validate, no problem. We can allocate it right back to individual, divisions, etc., etc. So actually, at the time of writing and approving the business case, had COVID actually not impacted, then I think we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I also think, just to give you a bit more comfort, that we are now engaging much earlier with APU and DPU. They are now part of building our proposals, our business cases. So actually we should get, hopefully be able to do a bit more of that linking into actually how is it making a difference. But genuinely, we wouldn't have been able to validate what we did. As it really is a COVID impact, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think on your point about if COVID hadn't hit, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think if COVID hadn't hit as well, we'd still be implementing CAM because the rollout was much slower. And that's I think what's so disappointing, because we pressed hard into that and delivered it really fast and really well. And that's what I think where my disappointment is, that we're not able to kind of articulate the benefit that that's had in the business.
Yeah. Well, from a FT perspective, we can certainly demonstrate the other benefits it's achieved.
I just think that whole kind of how we deal with things and any kind of productivity gain is going to be crucially important going forward. And we're just going to have to get a lot more slick about how we are driving that through, really, and accounting for it. Thanks. Sorry, I'm going on a bit. Thank you.
No, I think it's a very valid area to question, Caroline, and I don't think there's any doubt that with the submissions made to date to the Justice Committee about what's been achieved over the first 10 years in terms of efficiency savings has been well received, but every public sector body is clearly going to be under the cosh for how to achieve and deliver further efficiency savings going forward. So I think it's very important that we're quite clear for everything that we're coming up with and going today and going forward, that we know how we've assessed where the benefits are going to come and be able to track whether we're able to achieve them or not. There will always be an element of over or under achievement against any sort of forecast, but I think Caroline's made the point quite clearly that we will be expected to demonstrate whether we've delivered or not. And if the baseline changes, that is a challenge we've got to find a solution to. Katrina, you've got a question.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, hi, thanks for the report, but very interesting. I would count myself as a relative newbie to this committee, and perhaps because I spent a year on the People Committee and the Policing Performance Committee, I'm still wearing those hats a wee bit. And this is a question I possibly could have asked my colleagues, but I'm going to ask you. What exactly do you mean by efficiencies? What when you're saying efficiencies, what does that mean? Is that taking officers or members of staff out of a particular role and moving them somewhere else? Or, I mean, can you just clarify for me what that means, please?
Yeah. So I mean, there's different kinds of benefits that we track. So there's efficiencies. There's productivity, and obviously there's a cashable piece. So productivity is where we take out a whole person or wherever. Efficiencies is where we add up. It might be But take mobile working, which is probably a good example that we can use. Mobile working was, it saved, you know, to save 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it was per, and we calculate that up, and we have a model that sits behind that and then calculates what that saving is going to be. But I'm happy to share, we've got lots of papers on what, how we measure that and what the definitions of each of these mean.
I would be really interested. Like I said, I could probably have asked my colleagues, but it just occurred to me while the conversation was taking place just now. I did actually have a wee star against item 3, so I had already kind of gone, oh, what does that actually mean? But yeah, thanks. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Andrew, you had your hand up. I think you take it back down again.
Yeah, Chair, just to add, you know, the FTE, you know, full-time equivalent. So, you know, part of the organisational design activity is looking at that translation from, you know, from the arms and legs into full people. So, you know, we do an estimate based on, you know, based on the model that Kerry outlined, and then the organisation, you know, then looks at how it actually applies that. So, that's, you know, that's a model that's obviously in development as well. So, I just wanted to highlight that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Alistair, any questions from you?
No, I don't have any direct questions at this stage. I appreciate the way this has been presented, and I'm probably overly simplifying it, but you know, you've got your efficiencies, your productivity, and your cashable savings, but actually you could translate that into pounds, shillings, and pence, because if you didn't have the efficiencies, if you didn't have the productivity, then your overall budget would need to be bigger, you know, potentially. So it's important that you can demonstrate that part of it, and also as the societal needs, risks, asks are changing, then the delivery models and the supporting models need to change. So that's where this has been moved to within the organisation. That's the way I'm understanding the overall value, you know, of this transformation programme, and what you're providing us as you know, with some detail around, you know, the quantity, the effective quantity of that. That's the way I'm viewing this. Hopefully that's right.
Well, ultimately, I think it does come down to the overall impact in overall terms on the budget.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that really struck me on slide 15 was the actuals to date of officer full-time equivalents and staff full-time equivalents. I suppose the obvious question that flows out of 1,567 officers full-time equivalent is how that interacts into different forms of demand. Because clearly we've got more or less the same number of officers working around the country, but they're doing different things. And how do we actually gather together the information that actually shows how the time saved has been used in other ways? I suppose that's really policing performance territory, but I think it would be useful to have some sort of idea as to how that is being reported elsewhere in the SPA. Kerry, do you know how that all works?
Yeah, I'll maybe come in and then let Andrew come in, because this is one we've obviously talked a lot about where, you know, how we then convert this into, you know, well, how are we changing our models, or how does it fit in with the demand and all that kind of stuff. And I think when we were together, we talked about how the organisation were setting up a work stream, if you like, that was led by the Chief Constable around, we feed in all this information. So the way it happens is we feed in the forecast, and a lot of this, obviously, these numbers, a lot of this were back in the day in mobile and etc. So some of the big numbers around that and criminal justice areas. But I'll let Andrew probably talk about the actual process, about how that feeds in. But from my perspective, we take this information and we feed it in further into the organisation to allow them to make a decision on where that capacity is then turned into, you know, to feed demand, etc. Andrew.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so, you know, historically, just because of the nature of the programmes and I suppose the evolving approach, I think we've spoke to members before that benefits tended to land where they fall, which obviously isn't ideal, and that's that's been reviewed and looked into, and we're able to demonstrate organisational changes that match or equally exceed the benefits delivered. So that kind of takes care of the history, if you like. Going forward, there's processes developing that actually allows that benefit piece to feed into organisational design, which then feeds into the kind of forums that Kerry spoke about, which then allows a kind of proactive movement of resource based on what's becoming available through transformation. So that certainly process certainly exists more in the kind of resourcing side. We are certainly part of that conversation, and that's taking place now. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that in the decade that Police Scotland's been in existence and SPA been in existence, a lot of things have changed. I'm going to take a very simple example that's been mentioned several times, is that people are no longer turning up at banks to rob them in person, they're doing them online. So the skills required and everything else that goes alongside policing today is very different from what it was 10 years ago. So things will keep changing. It's just a matter of effectively being able to tell the story in a way that people will understand, both within the organisation itself, but also our many stakeholders. So I don't underestimate the challenge of being able to gather the information, interpret it, and explain it. But I don't doubt there'll be a lot of people asking these questions. I think the new format is very welcome, and I think the way you've explained it is very clear. I don't in any way doubt the amount of hard work and thought that's gone into actually trying to restructure the presentation, but I think it's been very much appreciated by us this morning. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
So we're asked to note this particular report and to ask whatever questions that we feel appropriate. And I think we've done that just now. So thank you both, Andrew and Kerry, for your presences and responses this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now that brings us to the end of the public session. So